All right. So I'm going to kind of like introduce, just also like letting you know, you might see a few stragglers pop in as well for our meeting because we do tend to have a little bit of late members joining in. So you might see a
Okay.
bit more people jump in through there. But I did want to introduce you guys to our guest speaker. This is our first meeting of the entire semester. So we're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Dan Shelley. He is the executive director, correct, for the RTDNA nationally?
Yes.
Awesome. Do you kind of want to talk about your background and what the RTDNA is as a whole?
Sure. I'll give you the short version. RTDNA, the Radio Television Digital News Association, was founded in 1946 as the national radio, the National Radio News Editors. And over time, our name has evolved to keep up with the times. We were RTNDA for a long time, Radio Television News Directors Association. And then in 2009, we changed to our current name, Radio Television Digital News Association. My background, I have a long career as a working journalist, a news director, and then toward the end of my pre-RTDNA executive director career, I had served about 20 years on the board of directors in various capacities, including chairman of the board and as treasurer of our foundation. And prior to, on the professional side, mostly as a journalist, finished that part of my career in senior executive positions at CBS television stations, and a company called Radio One, which is now known as Urban One, which is the world's largest media company, multimedia company, multi-platform media company devoted to African American and urban audiences in the United States. And then the final year before joining RTDNA, I was senior vice president of digital content strategy at iHeartMedia, based here in New York, but traveled to the larger iHeart markets all over the country.
That is such a great career path. And I love how you kind of like jumped from different like market to market.
Yeah, I started, my hometown is actually a relatively small town in Missouri. And I worked there for 15 years and then moved to Milwaukee, where I worked for a radio television combo. Part of my job in Milwaukee was I helped run the Green Bay Packers radio network. So I was heartbroken when they lost the NFC championship the other night. I was there when Aaron Rodgers joined as Brett Favre's backup quarterback. So I've been following Aaron Rodgers all these years. And then from there went to CBS in New York. Then have stayed in New York since with Radio/Urban One, and now at RTDNA. RTDNA, our headquarters is in the National Press Building in DC. And during normal non-COVID times, when I'm not traveling back and forth between New York and DC, I'm generally spending a great deal of my time traveling in person around other parts of the country. So in another year, minus COVID, I might have come to see you this evening.
We would have loved that. We would have definitely loved that.
I've been to Cal State Fullerton, but not Cal State Northridge.
Well, you got to check it out because we're pretty cool over here.
Pretty great campus with a lot of great people. I will agree.
I believe you.
So at the CSUN RTDNA here, we have a lot of guest speakers and different types of workshops. Can you kind of like talk about what our members would be able to do with the national RTDNA and what the national RTDNA kind of offers?
Well, Sophia, you asked me a question in an email, and I realized as I was going back through your emails before hopping on the Zoom call, one of the questions you asked me that and I apologize for this, that I never answered is, are you automatically RTDNA members? And unfortunately, the answer is no. But the good news is that it's very inexpensive for you to join. Just go to rtdna.org. Look at the membership category, student members, and you'll see that it's very affordable. As an RTDNA member, you get complete and unfettered access to all of our education programming, which includes a lot of professional development, a lot of training that would be applicable to young journalists. You know, we like to say at RTDNA, and it's the truth, which is why we like to say it, that we have three fundamental missions. Number one is to provide professional development to all journalists, from students to senior level. In other words, providing professional development training and learning opportunities to journalists, broadcast and digital journalists at all levels of their careers. The second is what we call recognizing outstanding responsible journalism, which we do through the Edward R. Murrow Awards. We're the Murrows people. They're some of the most prestigious journalism awards in the country. I like to think they rank right up there with the Peabodys and the Pulitzers and the DuPonts. It's very popular and very competitive. A few years ago, we started student Murrow categories. If you go to our website, rtdna.org, and look under the, I believe it's the student tab, or the awards tab, and you'll see student Edward R. Murrow Awards. Again, very inexpensive to enter, but a very prestigious competition. In fact, I mentioned Cal State Fullerton. They won one of the National Student Murrow Awards this past year.
Oh, wow.
So we also have scholarships, by the way. So look under the RTDNF section of our website, look for under scholarships, and you'll see that our scholarship application period is now open. I would strongly encourage you to apply for a scholarship. They're not huge amounts of money, but they do come in very handy in offsetting some of the expenses you have as student broadcast and digital journalists. Among our past winners, our many past winners throughout the years, are David Louie, who's a longtime reporter at KGO in San Francisco, but also a guy named David Muir, you may have heard of, who's the anchor of ABC World News. And Ari Melber, who has a show on MSNBC. He is one of our past scholarship recipients. So I encourage you to apply. For a lot of people, it's done them a lot of good, and they've gone very far in their career.
So we do
And the third,
oh, sorry, I was just going to ask you. We do have quite a few seniors in our RTDNA membership as well. Can seniors apply for those scholarships too?
we also have fellowships that are for young professional journalists. So yeah, seniors can apply. I will tell you that the scholarship committee, the people who decide to whom the scholarships are awarded, often take that into consideration, and will choose a lower class student rather than a recent graduate, but not always. So it certainly can't hurt. And then finally, the third main pillar that we have, the third main area where we focus a lot of our time and attention is called defending the First Amendment and defending a free press. We 4 years ago now formed what we call the Voice of the First Amendment Task Force. We have been very active in legislatures, in Congress, in local, state, and federal courts, even the U.S. Supreme Court, on Congress, in Congress, and in state houses across the country, in advocating for freedom of the press, because we strongly believe that the First Amendment is there not just to protect journalists, but is there to protect the public and the public's need to know, and the journalist's ability to serve the public by seeking and reporting the truth on behalf of the communities where they live.
Perfect. That's really great. I love those three different categories that you guys have too, because that kind of really covers a really broad spectrum as well, especially for student journalists to take advantage of.
Absolutely.
So we did have a question from Andre. He is our treasurer. will there be a name change, including social media, for the SMRTDNA?
All the years I've been involved and all the places I've gone and all the people I've seen and all the questions I've taken, I will tell you, Andre, that's one that I have never received before. So kudos to you for that. Unfortunately, the answer is very unlikely, if not just a flat no, at least not in the foreseeable future. We have mixed feelings about social media, as do most people. We think it's a valuable tool for journalists to connect to their communities and to their audiences, their viewers, listeners, and readers. But we also think it's fraught with peril. It's way too easy to go down a nasty rabbit hole and inadvertently express an opinion that would hamper your credibility as a journalist. So very, very unlikely, I would say, if not flat no. Yeah, go ahead.
I get my other question regarding to, I guess, your the organization's work as far as legislation. How did that come about? And yeah, I guess more so, yeah, how did that come about? Or that's
Well,
yeah.
pardon me, we've been doing, excuse me, we've been doing that off and on for the last 30 or 40 years. In one capacity or another. Our work in that area really accelerated within the last 4 years when we saw unprecedented challenges at the federal, state, and local levels around the country to press freedom and to journalists' ability to seek and report the truth to serve their communities where they live. And it really escalated, obviously, starting at the end of last May with the racial awakening and the George Floyd protests and the Antifa rioting and civil unrest. And that has been followed, obviously, by political unrest related to the November election. So we've really been doing it for decades. In one form or another, but it really escalated during the last 4 years, and particularly during the last 8, 10, 12 months.
And because you guys are in DC, do you have I would assume you have a pretty close connection to the people that work within DC that kind of work on that piece of legislation?
Yeah, I talk frequently with, if you want to affect legislation in Congress, the people you need to know are not necessarily the elected representatives. It's the key members of their staffs who actually draft the legislation in 99.9% of the cases. They actually have great influence over the member of Congress or the senator for whom they work. So I spent a lot of time speaking with legislative directors on congressmen and congresswomen's staffs and senators' staffs. I also speak fairly frequently with their chiefs of staff and their higher level aides, and occasionally with the senators or representatives themselves. But the real work on Congress is done by the staff. And I think any member of Congress who is being honest with you would say that. So that's who we talk to, who I talk to predominantly. And it's very important for me to make a distinction. What I do when I talk to them is not lobby for or against pieces of legislation, but advocate for the concept of press freedom and do it through the lens or the prism of specific pieces of legislation that we either propose or that they have already proposed and we want to lend our support to.
Got it. Thank you.
That's an important legal distinction. We don't lobby, but we do a lot of grassroots work on Capitol Hill.
So I did have a question, actually a couple questions for you. I would love to buy all of our members some like a membership, student memberships for the RTDNA nationally, but we don't necessarily have the funding right now. Is it possible to partner with you guys to kind of like fundraise, or is there any kind of like anything that you guys usually do throughout the year to fundraise?
Well, let me look at something here. How many members do you have?
We have roughly participating members, roughly about like 20-ish.
20?
Mhm.
If you will sign up every member of your chapter, we will give you a 50% discount on each one.
That's amazing.
That would be
Oh,
so
I'm not
great.
muted, but that's amazing. Thank you.
Yes, that would be
As the financial treasurer, that's really appreciative, and I really thank you. Well, we all thank you. Thank you. That's very amazing.
I know.
Yeah, I see in the chat that you have 33 members, but not all are active. So we would ask that you sign up at least a majority of your members, and if you do so, we will give you 50% off each one.
That would be so great. Would I go through you to kind of like talk to you about that, and how would we be able to
Yeah, you can
kind of
start.
like-
You can start with me, and I'll hook you up with our director of membership, marketing, and communications.
That would be really amazing. I would absolutely love that. We value our members so much at the RTDNA, and we try to, especially since we're virtual now, we don't necessarily get the benefits as we would in person. So we try to give as much as we can, especially since most of us are either journalism majors, communication, there are PR as well, and then some cinema television majors as well, but they're all interested in media. So we try to give as much information, or at least some sort of like help for our members too. So that would be really helpful.
Great. We'd love to have you as actual members of the national organization, and we'd be pleased to provide that discount. If you'll, you say you have 33 members. If you sign up, let's say at least 20 of them.
Would you guys be able to help share some of our posts as well, or retweet or anything like that? I'm not sure who does your social media.
Well, if you tag our director of membership, marketing, and communications also does our social media. And if you tag us in a post, it automatically shows up in our feeds, and our either I or our director of membership, marketing, and communications will see it, and we'll be happy to share any that we think would be good for our entire membership.
Perfect. And what are some of the key values? Oh, let me ask Savannah's question before we kind of move on from this. So what suggestions do you have for fundraising? This is something that we've been working on a lot lately, but since we're virtual, it's kind of been a little bit of a struggle.
Well, what have you tried so far? Let me ask you that.
So Andre, do you kind of want to talk about that?
Yeah, so far we've established a GoFundMe. It's raising some funds. It's been up since I want to say like late November. We've been slowly getting money, but I think there's a little bit of a dry spell there. We're still trying to promote it. I think that's also something we need to do, but we're promoting it. But we have a GoFundMe, and right now, well, I was going to discuss this, but we're gonna try and do a raffle. I'm gonna try and do that later this month. So those are just some ideas floating around. But for as of right now, we have a GoFundMe that is helping us with our fundraising.
Also, when we partnered with the Tea House,
Yes, we also did that.
Yeah.
What on GoFundMe? How would I find your fundraiser? Is it active now?
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
I
I can find it and go ahead and give you the link if you'd like, but that's
I think Savannah said that she's going to pull it up and put it in the chat.
okay. That sounds good. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. So quick question actually. So what are some of the key values that the RTDNA members kind of practice? Are there any in particular that any kind of like rules or anything like that?
Well, one of the things that we are known for, in addition to the many things that I talked about earlier, is our code of ethics. And again, if you'll go to rtdna.org, and you will see legal/ethics in the menu bar and scroll down to our code of ethics.
Yeah, we've actually I'm gonna allow you to share your screen if you want to as well. But we last semester we did have a whole meeting talking about the code of ethics and different types of code of ethics, actually from the National RTDNA too. But I would love for you to kind of like talk about it more, since a lot of us, I know some of us are seniors graduating this semester, including me and Savannah. So we would like to become reporters as well. So I'm not sure what the best practice or anything that you would like to talk about for that too.
Can you see it on the Zoom?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. You know, some things that are very important about the code of ethics. Number one is that this is not something that we dictate for our members. And that's for a variety of reasons. Although we strongly encourage all journalists, including our members, to follow this code of ethics. And I'll be very transparent, and I'll tell you exactly why we don't require it of our members. And that is because we have found that the code of ethics has been used against us and our members in some court cases. Most recently, there was a court case in Seattle where a citizen journalist who was actually a political activist, but claimed he was a journalist and instigated a situation at his county courthouse that resulted in his arrest. And he claimed that he was a journalist, and therefore under Washington state law, he deserved, I don't want to say special treatment, because we don't believe in special treatment for journalists, but there are laws in many states, including Washington and probably in California, that give certain privileges to journalists just so we can do our jobs. But he claimed he was a journalist, and in the court documents, the briefs that were filed, our code of ethics was used widely by him to try to make the argument that he was a legitimate journalist. It's also occasionally, unfortunately, some journalists get sued and accused of slander or libel. And we've seen in many cases our code of ethics being used by plaintiffs' attorneys in those kinds of defamation cases as evidence that, as purported evidence that the defendant, the TV station, radio station, or digital outlet that they're suing must have been guilty because they violated the RTDNA code of ethics. So it's for those reasons, unfortunate reasons, that we don't require members to follow this, but we do strongly encourage it. Mm-hmm. And as I said, it's pretty self-explanatory. Truth and accuracy above all, and I love this line, the facts should get in the way of a good story, right?
Yeah.
Also, trending and going viral or exploding on social media only heighten the need for strict standards of accuracy. And unfortunately, often in the rush to get something on social media, people can make mistakes.
Yeah.
And the story may not have been thoroughly vetted and reported, or reported and vetted, I should say.
Yeah, unfortunately, we did see that with Kobe's death when he, because I know that a lot of the media was trying to get it out there, so all of the facts weren't necessarily correct.
You know, and another important part of this area of the code of ethics is that there are often more than just two sides to every story, right? And there's a raging debate at the highest levels of the big journalism companies now, and journalism schools across the country, many of them anyway. Are journalists obligated to tell both sides of the story? Well, what if one side of the story is QAnon and the crazy conspiracy theories that are not based in fact? What if that's one side of the story? Are you obligated to speak to and report what a QAnon leader or member says in the name of balance and fairness when it's demonstrably false, i.e. the Pizzagate situation in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago? I'm sure you're familiar with that. And there are many other conspiracies that have emanated from QAnon-like thinking. Another area where that principle is really important is climate change. When 98.9% or whatever it is of all reputable scientists believe that climate change is real, do you really have to get the other side of the story? Do you really have to provide 50-50 treatment to both sides of that argument? We don't say yes or no, but we do believe that journalists today need to weigh those kinds of concerns. And it really makes journalists' jobs a little tougher because it makes our jobs a little more tedious, having to track down conspiracy theories, having to make sure that stories are fair and balanced, rather than giving equal time to both sides of each story. Independence and transparency, very important. There's a lot of sponsor provided content. A lot of people, while they are journalists, all journalists are people too, and they have interests, they have beliefs, they have opinions. Journalists have an obligation to do their best to keep those opinions and beliefs and affiliations out of their news coverage. But where they do exist, they must be disclosed so that the public knows that, okay, I can trust Sophia, but I know she's a member of the Audubon Society, and therefore she skews toward the environmentalist point of view. So those sorts of things, in an ideal world, you would avoid doing anything, joining any organization with even the most remote chance of controversy being attached to it. And a lot of journalists do that, and a lot of journalists never vote because they don't want they are so fiercely dedicated to the notion that they cannot be politically biased. They don't even vote. They give up one of their most sacred rights as a citizen. And they do it purposefully so that, if one side or the other of the political spectrum accuses them of being biased toward the other side, they can say, hey, I don't even vote. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm not an independent. I don't even vote. Personally, in my personal opinion, I think that goes too far because journalists are citizens too. But that's one extreme of that argument. But anything that might affect your independence or the as you report a story, you must disclose in the story, and you must be completely transparent about it. If you make a mistake, and that's the third bullet point, accountability for consequences. If you make a mistake, you correct it as quickly as possible and as prominently as the original mistake was made. You hold those responsible accountable, and you be completely transparent with the public about what the mistake was, how it was made, why it was made, and who was at fault. And we've seen in recent years some very high-profile national journalists lose their jobs because they failed to quickly enough and prominently enough correct their errors, or they made sloppy mistakes that were really inexcusable. And one thing I want to point out to you, in addition to our code of ethics, we have coverage guidelines. And you'll see here, we have dozens and dozens and dozens of coverage guidelines. They're not really our code of ethics, but they provide guidance and ask questions that you should think about when you're doing live coverage, using telephone calls on the air, 911 calls, bomb threats, etc. You can go down the list, but I strongly suggest that you use these as guideposts as much as you use our actual code of ethics.
Yeah, that's very helpful as well. And that is such a, like Andre just said right now, that's such an amazing resource to have, because I honestly, I didn't know that you guys had that either. And I should have, because I would definitely love to take advantage of that.
Well, please do. It's there. It's there for the, I mean, we didn't post it, so no one would use it. So
Yeah.
we want you to use it.
So I kind of wanted to ask you, do you know the reason why the RTDNA was started and what the kind of like basis was behind it?
Sure. RTDNA was started by a group of World War II era radio reporters. And I don't want to get too in the weeds here with the history of broadcast news, but really broadcast news came of age in World War II. Prior to that, there was no television, of course, until the late 1940s. And World War II was in the early 1940s. So we're talking exclusively about radio here. And for the most part, though there are exceptions, prior to World War II, newscasts on radio consisted of nameless announcers reading newspaper stories, to the extent that newscasts did exist, although the FCC and its predecessor have required, since Marconi invented the radio practically, that broadcast licensees or stations provide a certain percentage of their programming in the public interest and public affairs programming. So initially, news was part of the public affairs department of a radio station or a network. It wasn't until World War II came along, well, it was in the probably 5 years prior to World War II, starting at about 1934, 1935, that real news as we know it today was born. And there were a lot of pioneers. Paul White was the first news director at CBS Radio News. He was the news director of Edward R. Murrow, who's widely known as the father of broadcast news.
Yes.
The World News Roundup was a newscast on the CBS network that started in 1937 and has been continuing daily, 7 days a week, ever since that April day in 1937. So it's the longest running broadcast in world history, continuously running broadcast in world history. Journalism, broadcast journalism as we know it today, really came of age in World War II with Edward R. Murrow and what his staff, which he called the Murrow Boys, even though there was one woman who reported on combat and on events from key locations in the war. So a lot of these radio journalists who had participated in covering World War II in one fashion or another got together in 1946, the year after the war ended. And RTDNA was founded by a radio news director in the state of Maine by the name of John Hogan, who had worked during World War II. He collaborated with a lot of the friends that he made in radio news during World War II, and they decided to start the radio news, the National Radio Editors, which eventually became RTDNA. So that's how it started. Long answer to a very simple question, but I think it's an important context, and I'm glad you asked it. And as I noted earlier, since then, we've been adapting and changing, obviously, our programs, changing our name a few times, and changing our focus based on the current needs at any given time of our members and the industry that we serve.
Well, I think that's a very interesting start too. Actually, I didn't know that. So that is a very interesting start to have for an organization, especially in radio back then.
Now, I'm going to put in the chat
Okay.
a link to something that is kind of buried on our website, but it talks about how D-Day and World War II helped inspire the founding of RTDNA. It's an article I wrote a year and a half ago or so.
I would love to read that after our call. I will definitely check that out. So thank you so much. So quick question for our students as well. Is there any internship opportunities that the RTDNA offers?
Not at RTDNA itself. We don't presently offer internships. I can't remember if we ever have or not. Not in the many years that I've been associated either as a board member or now as executive director. But I do know that there are lots of internship opportunities at virtually every company that does news, and it shouldn't be that hard to find internships. Though I will tell you, it did become a little more difficult during the Obama administration when, and I personally, and this is my personal feeling, not RTDNA's necessarily, but the Labor Department under President Obama issued a ruling that interns have to be paid. And prior to that, most interns were not paid money, but were given class credit in exchange for their work in a newsroom or in a media operation. But now they have to be paid, and that's with some companies they've decided we don't want to take any risks. We're going to limit the number of internships, but most companies have very vibrant internship programs. And the worst thing that can happen if you ask for an internship in a newsroom is that they will say no. And no one has ever died from being told no, they can't have an internship that I'm aware of.
I'm not aware of that either, but that would be interesting if they did. Andre, did you have a question?
So just going back to internships, and I guess with the amount of vast experience you've had working in media, how would you say is like just one quick tip to like present yourself? Like say you're in, or for example, and when you're in an interview, what is the best, I guess, way to look at it? Because I find myself like very nervous at times, and how could I like mitigate that, I guess, with all the experience you have? How could I best like not do that when I'm interviewing for internships?
Well, first you have to get the attention of the person for whom you want to be an intern. And you have to be bold and brazen and confident and say and do things that are very professional, but will make you stand out from the crowd of other applicants. True story. I once got a job. I told you that I started in a relatively small town in Missouri where I was born and grew up. I was news director of a radio station there, and I wanted to be news director at a much larger radio station in a much larger city, which would have meant that I would have jumped from market rank 152, the 152nd largest radio market in the country, to the 25th largest radio market in the country, which is an astronomical jump in market size for anybody. So I prepared my resume and I wrote my cover letter. And the first sentence of my cover letter was, "Dear Steve," which was the first name of the hiring manager. "Dear Steve, I'm a big fish in a small pond, yearning for open water. And with all due respect, that's good news for you." And he told me later that it was that opening sentence of my cover letter that got me the job. Now, there was a lot more to it than that. There were interviews and all that sort of thing. But he said you wouldn't have even made it to round one if it weren't for your cover letter. So don't be afraid to be bold, but obviously be very truthful, be very accurate. Don't embellish anything. A question during the interview process, assuming you get that far, that you are almost certain to get, is what are your greatest strengths? What would you consider your greatest weaknesses? Have good, honest answers for both. It's not a bad thing to have weaknesses. It is a bad thing if you lie about them. So be prepared for those kinds of questions. And also, you're the guy who wondered if we were going to include social media in our name someday. Police your social media accounts, because I guarantee you, whether you're interning, or whether you're interviewing for an internship, or whether you're interviewing for your first professional job, or you're interviewing for a senior management position at a large national media company, they're going to check out your social media platforms and your social media accounts.
So would it be best then to like just fully have a professional like social media and then have a private, or is it like, yeah, sorry. So is it best to like just have a public social media that is like, for all intents and purposes, like that's you as a journalist and that's all that's online basically? Or should it, or is it better or possible to like also have a private social media that no one's really gonna find, or is that not possible? Someone will eventually find it.
Well, I think someone, if they really want to, will eventually find it.
Okay.
But I do know a lot of journalists who have their professional social media accounts and their personal social media accounts. You know, a good friend of mine is a prominent network news correspondent on television. Well, he does some radio too. Uh, excuse me. And he has both personal and professional Facebook and Instagram accounts. But he's very open on both and very honest about who he is, and he's very careful, even on his private Instagram and Facebook accounts, not to say anything that would give clues as to what he thinks in terms of politics or ideology or whatever. It's just he posts about his personal life on his Instagram accounts and his family and his pets and all that kind of stuff. And it's on his professional accounts, it's strictly news related.
So Savannah,
Well, thank you.
question as well.
Yeah, so kind of
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand raised there in the corner.
Oh, that's okay. Don't worry about it. So my question's kind of piggybacking off of the internship question. Because of COVID-19, it's been kind of hard for students to get an internship. So what would your suggestion be for students that are looking for more experience?
Well, yeah, I mean, COVID is, I hate this expression, but it is what it is. And yeah, it's very tough to get internships in this era of COVID. And I'm afraid I don't really have a very good answer for you. I would tell you this, do your best to connect with and stay connected with the decision makers when it comes to who gets internships at newsrooms and media companies, so that when this COVID world we find ourselves in now finally goes away and things get back to normal, you will still be top of mind with that person. So keep doing the work now, even though the internships may not exist to any great degree, so that when things relax a little bit, you're still, and they think, okay, we can have interns again. Yeah, I'm going to call Savannah because she's been really persistent.
So what are some of the kind of like advantages to being a member of the RTDNA, and what can we kind of like take advantage of as students as well?
Well, everything is open to members. The only thing students can't do is vote in board and officer elections. Everything else you can do. You get discounts on entering the Mural Awards. You get free access to most of the educational and professional development training that we do is free anyway. But every once in a while, there's something that is really sought after or really special, and we'll put it behind a paywall or a partial paywall. You get free access to all of that. All the resources that we provide as a student member, it's yours just by virtue of the fact that you're a member.
I actually have another question. I've been looking at the different kinds of membership. So for example, me and Sophia are seniors, and we would want the student membership now, but when we graduate, would we have to buy a new membership?
Yes. You would then go into the new professional category.
Okay.
Within the first 2 years of graduating from school.
Okay.
So let's say you graduate from school, you get your first job in Abilene, Texas, or wherever. and you want to stay in RTDNA, well, you have to re-sign up or re-register as a new professional member.
Sounds good. Would you?
And then after 2 years, you become TV news staff or radio news staff or digital news staff.
Oh, awesome. And would you suggest, since both of us are graduating, and then I think Gina as well is graduating this spring, would you suggest, since we are graduating in about maybe 4 months or so, just not doing the student membership and doing the professional one instead?
Well, are you going to get a job right out of school?
I'm going to try, yes.
Yeah, my suggestion would be this: since we're offering the 50% discount and we're only talking $26, right, per membership, with the 50% discount applied, why not? Why not join as a student? And then you can stay a member even though you graduate until you get you can stay a student member until you get your first job.
Okay.
And that's when you transition to a new professional. And then it's only another $85.
Yeah. Perfect. And for anybody who's on here as well, you guys are welcome to unmute yourself or ask any questions too, just letting you know. But Dan, can you kind of like talk about what you would suggest for students right now? Kind of like putting themselves out there, even though they are like, we're in a pandemic, so it's a little bit harder to kind of like put yourself out there, but what would your suggestions be with us kind of like keeping relevant and doing things right now?
Well, do you have your reels ready?
Not all of us.
Get your reels ready.
Yeah.
That's something you can do in COVID.
Just take all your files, right? And just look at them.
You know, one of the many hats I wear in my job is I'm on the Accrediting Council for Education and Journalism and Mass Communication. And we're the body that decides whether journalism programs at colleges and universities are officially accredited. And most of the schools that are accredited have as a capstone requirement that their students all have a reel ready to go before they can graduate. And I don't know if Cal State Northridge is that way or not, but
yeah, it's a class requirement, I think, for a number of classes actually, but especially definitely before you graduate.
I know our portfolio class, I'm currently in both a senior project class, which is a capstone project, and a portfolio class, and she is requiring us to make our reel, as well as a website that contains our reel, our resume, and any other extra work that we have done that we would like to add. And it's all to our LinkedIn profiles as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. You know, I've met a lot of students throughout the years, and there are a few that still send me. In fact, I got one today from one of our past scholarship winners from 2 years ago, I think. And he, the reason I mentioned Abilene, Texas, is he was at University of Maryland, the Medill School, and he was one of our scholarship recipients. I met him at our annual conference. When we have in-person conferences, all our scholarship winners we bring to the conference so that they can network with professionals and try to get those jobs. So that's where I met the guy, and he sent me today just a copy of his latest reel, and he is just doing phenomenal. I can't overemphasize the need for a good reel, and staying in touch with people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not someone who hires journalists, but I know a lot of people who do. If the opportunity ever comes up for me to recommend somebody, this guy who still 2 years later is keeping in touch with me and sending me his latest reel every 6 months or every year or so, he's going to be top of mind the next time somebody asks me, hey, I need a new sports guy. Do you know anybody?
That's smart. And we did have a really good question from Jesse in the chat.
I see that.
Yeah, what's one thing on a reel that you would say consistently makes or breaks the reel?
What makes the reel is authenticity and solid reporting. One thing that breaks the reel is a lot of stunting, a lot
What
of
do you mean?
a lot of times I see reels from students or very young new professionals where they use gimmicks. I'm trying to think of an example of one I've seen recently. But you know, they'll do their stand up in verse or in rhyme, or they'll do funny physical things trying to make the story more interesting. And I will say that I will couch everything I'm saying in response to this question. With every news director is different, every hiring manager is different, every company is different, and look for different things. But the most important things are number one, writing. Even when you're doing a stand-up, it's got to be written and communicated well. And I would say also in the top 5 things that are very important is ad-libbing, being able to string together coherent sentences without a script and not too many mistakes. And number 3 is being just knowledgeable about the topic. I mean, you will be able to demonstrate if your reel is a good one. You'll be able to demonstrate in that reel that you know the subject matter, that you've done your reporting, and you know what it is you want to say, and you know how to communicate it. So authenticity, no gimmicks, writing, ad-libbing. I would say those are 4 of the most important things.
And for any of our members, would we be able to email you and ask you any kind of questions or advice or anything?
Sure. Now that we know each other so well, I'd be happy for you to reach out to me at any time.
And remember, CSUN RTDNA chapter.
CSUN, yes,
Go Matadors.
yes.
So I know that it's 3 more minutes till 6. I don't want to keep you any longer because I know that you are on the East Coast as well. So it's getting a little late for you. So I am going to wrap it.
What do I turn into, a pumpkin at 9 o'clock?
No, I just don't want to take up a ton of your time because I know that you are quite busy. Maybe you aren't. I mean, maybe maybe you want to stay on.
It's up to you. It's your meeting. I'm just a guest here.
Thank you. Well, I did want to wrap it up for anybody else as well who has to. Some of us, I think some of us have class as well, but
I did want to ask one more thing.
Sure.
Kind of overall in general, what are some tips that you would give students?
Be persistent. Be persistent. I used to tell people be fearless, but the climate for journalists out in the quote unquote real world now is so sketchy in a lot of places. You've always got to be mindful of your personal safety, of your surroundings. You've got to be hyper vigilant and hyper aware, simply because we live in such a ideologically divided country right now, and politically divided country. And I don't want to scare anybody, but there were more assaults on journalists in the United States of America last year than in probably the previous 20 years combined. Certainly the previous 10 years combined. You know, one of the projects we participate in is the U.S. Press Freedom Tracker. We're one of more than 30 press freedom and journalism groups that work on it's pressfreedomtracker.us. And you can go on there and you can see the kinds of things that are happening in America today, especially since May 31st of last year. But it's ongoing. So be careful out there. But be persistent. Be persistent, particularly as it relates to getting that job, persistent as it relates to getting the information to which the public is entitled. Remember, you're out there representing the public and acting on the public's behalf. Remember that part of your job is to hold the powerful accountable, but to do so responsibly without unnecessarily putting yourself in harm's way, or certainly not provoking an arrest or incarceration or harassment by police. Sadly, that became a much bigger problem last year than it has been in recent memory. I mean, all journalists get hassled by the cops from time to time, and by others who don't like the news media. But you need to be in the business because you believe in it and you believe in yourself and you believe that journalists exist to make their communities better and you want to be part of that process. Don't do it because, I'm kind of rambling now, but sort of stream of consciousness here. Don't get into the business because you want fame and glory, because relatively few attain it. Get into the business because you want to make a difference in your community. Get in the business because you want to make a difference. Get in the business because you think you can help your community be better, because you will help create a more informed and educated society, because the reporting that you do will serve as a catalyst for positive change in your community. Those are the reasons that I got into journalism many years ago, and those are the reasons, the best reasons I found that people continue to get into journalism. There are always folks who get into it just because they like being on camera, or they like the sound of their own voice on the radio or on a podcast. But those are the wrong reasons, in my view, to do it. The reasons to do it is because you want to make a difference. You want to make, way back when I was in high school, we had career day, and the number one disc jockey in the city where I grew up was the speaker. And I was 15 years old. My voice was still breaking from puberty, was still cracking. And I was just in awe of this guy, because I knew from a very early age that I wanted to be in broadcasting. And so, again, he was the number one disc jockey in my hometown. When the session was over, it took every ounce of courage I had to go up to him. His name was Jerry Higley. And I said with my crackly, pubescent voice, "Hi, Mr. Higley. My name is Dan, and I want to be a disc jockey just like you." And he looked at me and he goes, "You don't want to be a disc jockey." He said, "You want to be a newsman." And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, answer me this. How many 80-year-old disc jockeys can you name?" And I couldn't. He said, "Now, how many 80-year-old newsmen can you name?" And these names would mean nothing to you now, but back then I was able to rattle off 3 or 4. And he goes, "You see, when you're a disc jockey and you're 80 years old, nobody knows you. You're probably dead. When you're a newsman and you're 80 years old, people think you're a statesman." And that changed my life. From that moment on, I got on the school paper. I got on the speech and debate squad. I joined with a buddy of mine. We started a high school radio station that ran newscasts and played songs, excuse me, over the intercom during lunch hour in the cafeteria. And I went to school to become a radio newsman, and my college advisor forced me to call up the number one news department in the city where I grew up. And I was, again, it was one of those nervous moments. He had to force me to make the call. And I made the call and got a hold of the news director. And I said, yeah, my name is Dan, and I'm wondering if you have any internships available. He goes, you want to be an intern? I said, yeah. He goes, okay, you got it. Be here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. That's all there was to it. And I showed up. I was supposed to be there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 9 to noon. And once I got in that building and got in that newsroom, they couldn't get rid of me. I mean, I emptied the trash. I went and got food for them. I'd go cover stories with them. I stuck around so much that they had to kick me out at night because they were worried that I was missing classes, which I was. But you know what? 3 months into the internship, I got a job, and I've been working in the business ever since. And by the way, in that very first newsroom, a few years later, the very first newsroom where I worked, a few years later, I stopped by the newsroom on a Saturday morning, and I heard a police call on the police scanner in our newsroom. Officers were being dispatched to another radio station in town. A listener had called the police and said, I'm worried about the disc jockey because when the record stopped, all I hear now on the radio is shh, 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 shh. And this is back before CDs. This is when they actually had actual records. And so I knew the cop, and I called the cop later, and I said, what was the call at the radio station? And he said they looked in the window and they saw the disc jockey was lying on the floor, and the record had ended and it was still going around the turntable. And so all they were broadcasting was the of the needle, right? And they're on the record. So they broke into the radio station, the cops did, and found this guy passed out, dead drunk at like 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And you're not going to believe this, but it's honest to God, a true story. That disc jockey was the same guy I'd met in high school who told me, you don't want to be a disc jockey, you want to be a newsman. How many 80-year-old disc jockeys can you name?
Wow.
It was the same guy.
I'm sure that changed your life too, seeing
Yeah.
that. I did want to ask you as well, but thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate that. That was kind of, I didn't, that was a very turn. So I didn't expect that one at the end.
I haven't told that story in a long time. I don't know what prompted me to do it now.
I enjoyed it. But is there any safety tips that you would give to student journalists when they are covering any sort of protests or any kind of anything like that? Because I know that personally, I have been in a sticky situation just from last year, and there has been a lot more protests. Any kind of like anything that you would give as advice?
Yeah, right here. rtdna.org/safety. It's got, and by the way, this is growing as the situation warrants around the country. But on the right-hand side in the blue, stay safe, know your rights, report responsibly. You'll see all kinds of resources here from RTDNA and from some of our partner organizations. But what I say all the time to journalists is simply watch your backs, but don't back down. Know your rights, but stay safe. If you feel uncomfortable at any point in the field, covering any story, leave. Your news director or professor or whoever, supervisor, they should give you the freedom and the latitude to say no. If they want to send you to a place where you know you're not going to feel or be safe, you should have the right to be able to say no without any penalty. Just a few things, but a lot of it's just common sense. Make sure somebody always knows where you are. Make sure that you have your cell phone and it's always charged and always on. Make sure that you always have a place. You always, when you're in the field, you always spot a business or some other place that you know you can run to if things get out of hand quickly, where you know you can go and be safe. It sounds like common sense stuff, but people in the heat of the moment often lose track.
Yeah, those are good tips. And Lily, did you have a question?
Hi, yes. Hello, Dan. I'm Liliana Ramirez. I'm the social media coordinator here for RTDNA, and I have a quick question. So I know you mentioned about reels, news reels. I have a question in regards to the stand-ups as a young, I guess as amateur going professional. For stand-ups, do you recommend just doing regular standard stand-ups, just standing up, like do a regular stand-up, or do you recommend us doing like creative or walking stand-ups? Because I have a professor who just wants basic standard stand-ups right now since we're barely learning, and then there's other professors who told me, oh, you need to do more active stand-up. So now I'm like, okay, one professor's telling me one thing, one professor's telling me the other. I don't know what to do.
And you know what? News directors are going to be the same way. Some are going to tell you, you got to do walk and talk. I don't want to see a stand up. I don't want to see any static stand up. There's got to be movement and action, even if it's just a walk and talk. And you're going to find some news directors that say, don't do that silly crap. Just stand there and do it. Okay. So you're going to find the same thing in the quote unquote real world, the professional world. So, you know, if I had the luxury and I were in your position, the luxury of time and the luxury of being able to do some research, I would go on a station's website and watch some of their stories, because all television stations put their stories up on their websites, right? I would watch their stories and do their reporters do the static websites, or do they do the walk and talks, or the some kind of movement in the stand up? And then I would customize my reel. I would have a bunch of different clips in all different styles, and I would put together a reel custom for what you see on that station's website they prefer.
Okay, and then one last question. How long do you think reels should be? Because I know there's some people say 5 minutes, but then some people say 5 minutes too long. It should be 2 or 3 minutes. What do you recommend the time for a news reel be?
Well, if you don't capture their attention right away in the first 15 seconds, they're not going to watch anymore. So it really doesn't matter how long it is. Okay. You make it as long as you think it needs to be to capture their attention and capture their imagination. Okay. By imagination, I mean interest, to make them interested in you as their next reporter.
Perfect. Thank you.
You know, I tend to think, and you know, this is just one opinion, 5 minutes is a good rule of thumb, but you gotta catch them right away.
Right.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate you coming on here today. Would you mind actually putting your email in the chat, if that would be okay, for anybody to contact you, or if they have any upcoming questions or anything like that? We definitely would love to get our members some of those memberships for the RTDNA as well. And we are going to try to get as much funding as possible to this semester, because we definitely want to help our members. But thank you so much. I will email you as well our GoFundMe page too, so you don't have to.
Yeah, email me the link to your GoFundMe page.
Okay, I definitely will, and then I'll send you as much information as we have. But it's all right there on the GoFundMe page too.
Okay.
Awesome, and then everybody connect with Dan on LinkedIn too, because he is super awesome, and you want to stay in contact with him. He's a good networking opportunity. just letting all of you guys know. So keep in contact with him. And Dan, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And you will be hearing from me soon.
All right. Well, thank you guys for the invitation and for the great questions. I appreciate it very much. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you for everything. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Dan.
Bye.
All right. Bye.